political parties today, and we want to go over a type of free response question that we have not discussed yet. We do have free response questions like some of the ones I've given you in the past, where they ask you to identify, describe, explain different aspects of government. But they also give us Supreme Court case comparisons. We've had one of those before, and we're going to look at more of them. But now we want to look at the last free response question that you're going to have, which is about the argumentative essay. Okay? And the argumentative essay is going to give you a question where conceivably you can make an argument for either side. Okay, they're going to give you a prompt, and notice I put in here too that they will always give you an argument, that a question or a prompt that will give you enough evidence from either side. In this question, they're not looking necessarily for a right or wrong answer from you. Technically, they give you something that could be right from either perspective. What they want to see is, can you look at evidence and information that you've learned from the course and build an argument from that? Okay, and so look, we've already talked about this topic, so this will be an easy one to walk you through. All right, it says the United States Constitution established a federal system of government. Under federalism, policymaking is shared between national and state governments. Okay, so they're giving you the definition of federalism. The federal government makes some laws, the states make some laws. Over time, the powers of national government have increased relative to those of the states. All right, so they're telling you also that we know the national government has gotten way more powerful than it was ever intended to. It's asking you, and here's the prompt, okay? They're asking you to develop an argument about whether the stronger national government, the expanded powers of national government, benefits or hinders policymaking. All right, remember, policies are just laws. All right, so basically they're saying, hey, the stronger national government, is this a help to lawmaking in our society, or does it hinder good policy making? All right, and they're saying, look, you've got to use at least one piece of evidence from the following foundational documents. So you either have to use the Articles of Confederation, Brutus number 1, or Federalist number 10. All right, you can pick any one of the three that you want to, but it says in your essay you have to first have a thesis that responds to the prompt and establishes a line of reasoning. We'll explain how to do that. Second, you have to support your claim or your thesis with at least two pieces of accurate and relevant evidence. One has to come from here. The second piece can come from any other foundational document not used as your first piece of evidence, or it may be from your knowledge of course concepts. So that means you can use Supreme Court cases, terms or definitions that would apply, any legislation or laws that we've talked about. You're going to see that come into play. All right. So any other evidence that you want to pull from your course. I mean, you could even use one of these again, too. These are more the foundational documents. Also, that list of documents like the Constitution, Federalist 51, all of those are fair game. Okay. Now it says at least two pieces of accurate and relevant evidence. If you can think of three or four, go ahead and include them. Remember, they're looking for what you get right, not necessarily what you get wrong. If you have like four pieces of evidence and it turns out that only two of them are accurate and relevant, they're going to count those right. All right, because they said we only needed two. Use reasoning to explain why your evidence supports your claim or your thesis. First, you're going to explain what your evidence is, like what is the Articles of Confederation or what is Brutus number 1, and then you're going to explain how this document relates back to your thesis. All right, that's the reasoning or the rationale. Then you have to respond to an opposing or alternative perspective using refutation, concession, or rebuttal. Okay. Now, all these little check marks here, think of this as like a to-do list. If you don't do these things, you're not going to get all the points. All right? This question's about federalism. They give you the introduction. We're not going to go over that. But the first thing you want to do is you're going to make a T-chart. All right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, the T-chart is going to have two columns here, one for one side of the argument and the other for the other side of the argument. How about that? All right. So one side is that strong national powers help policymaking. The other side is strong national government hinders policymaking. All right. Remember, here in the prompt, they're saying develop an argument about whether the expanded powers of the national government benefits or hinders policy. So over here, this would be the benefit side. This would be the hinders side. All right. Now, I'm throwing out a bunch of evidence. And remember, No matter which side we pick, there's plenty of evidence for either one. And there might be things that you think of that I don't think of. This is just what I came up with, okay? And it's not an exhaustive list. Strong national powers help policy making. You can make an argument about the Articles of Confederation, because remember, Articles of Confederation was all about state authority and a weak national government, and it flopped. States were too competitive against each other, and they didn't take advantage of how one policy for everybody would actually work out well. All right. Federalist number 10. Remember, this is a document that talked about how large republics would diminish the likelihood that factions would have too much impact over policy. Brown versus Board of Education. This is a Supreme Court case that we've talked about where the Supreme Court said schools should be integrated. It's a policy that applies to the entire nation and inherently the right choice. All right. The elastic clause in the Constitution, the ability to make all laws which deem necessary and proper, implies that that they have more powers than what are mentioned. So you could even argue that the national government was always meant to have more powers than what are just listed. Federal mandates or laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, universal policies that prevent discrimination against people with disabilities are needed because states will not help vulnerable people in society. All right. The federal government sometimes has to step up and take action. Obergefell versus Hodges, a case where the Supreme Court overturned state bans on same sex marriage, creating a uniform policy that nobody can deny somebody a marriage certificate or a marriage license because they are marrying somebody of the same sex. All right. So those are things that you could use as pieces of evidence for the strong national powers. Now, remember, when you're making your T-chart, you don't have to write out even things that are this detailed. All you want to do is come up with pieces of evidence that you could use in your argument, saying that strong national power will actually help policy making. Okay. Now, on the other side, strong national government hinders policy making. All right. You could say, hey, the strong national government that we have today is actually a hindrance. All right. And here's some evidence that you could use. All right. And once again, it's not an exhaustive list. Now, you'll notice too, though, that sometimes certain documents can be used to support either side, like the Articles of Confederation. This is what the founders of the nation intended, for every state to have authority over their own policy making. Brutus number 1 says small republics governing over localized little small territories. That's super good for society. People are more likely to agree on things. The 10th Amendment in the Constitution, it meant for states to have the ability to make most policies about any particular issue. Okay? Obergefell versus Hodges. A lot of people think that was a bad decision because it took autonomy away from the states. All right. U.S. versus Lopez. In this instance, the Supreme Court said that Congress was exceeding their authority by trying to make laws about guns in schools. All right. And the federal mandates like the ADA. Many of these mandates require states to take action with no funding to help implement them. All right. That's a problem with policy making. Okay. Remember, you could incorporate other things in here, like more different types of federal mandates or law. You could even bring in grant money. All right. Now, let's start with this. Number 1, you need a thesis. Okay. Now, for every step of the way, step 1, the thesis, the evidence, the reasoning, the refutation, I'm going to give you example A and example B. All right. And so what we're going to look at all the way through the first time is example A only. So just kind of bear with me on this. All right. Once you make your T-chart, okay, and notice I said you'll need to work quickly, you're going to have to choose a side of the argument to come down on, and you have to write a clear thesis statement. You have to essentially, the best way to do this is restate the prompt and then articulate your position and include a line of reasoning. So let's look at example A. The first one I'm going to argue for is that stronger national policy is a good thing. Okay, so example A, notice this. Stronger national government powers lead to better policy making because state control over policy making often leads to mentality of mob rule. All right. Now notice that I pick a side. Stronger national government leads to better policy making. That's me coming down on a side. And then because, okay, there should be the word because in there because you have to state your position, which I've already done, and then you have to have a line of reasoning. You have to establish a line of reasoning saying, here's why. If the argument wasn't about government, let's say that I told you to develop an argument about the better flavor of ice cream. chocolate or vanilla. You would have to say in your thesis, chocolate is a better flavor of ice cream. All right. I come down on a side and then I put because. All right. The cocoa bean is a superior bean than the vanilla bean. That's my line of reasoning. All right. And then I'd have to list all the ways in which chocolate is superior. All right. So here's my statement: stronger national government powers lead to better policy making because state control over policy making often leads to a mentality of mob rule. All right. So I've got my thesis. All right. I promise you, if you don't put that second part in your thesis statement, they won't give you a point for it. All right. So here we go. Now, next order of business for you people, you got to look at the evidence. All right. We have to use the evidence here. And remember, we're just looking, I'm going to show you one piece of evidence. You got to do two, but just bear with me here. All right. You have to explain each piece of evidence. All right. You got to tell what this is all about. And so I'm going to use Federalist number 10 to explain why policy making under strong federal power is a good thing. Okay, so my example A here, this argument, Federalist number 10, that's one of the three documents they gave me, is one of many letters James Madison wrote to address fears that the new federal government under the Constitution would be too strong. In this document, he addresses the concerns that factions might exert too much influence over the national government. Madison argued that in a large republic, the danger of factions would be greatly reduced because so many factions would exist that no one would ever gain the majority needed to have too much influence in policy making. All right, so I'm going to use Federalist number 10, and my first step in the evidence is explaining what this evidence is. All right, that's what Federalist number 10 is. Okay, now I got to go to the reasoning. How does Federalist number 10, how does that somehow connect back to my thesis that, remember, my thesis is that stronger national policy making is better because state control over policy making leads to the mentality of mob rule. At the national level, we're not going to have mob rule. Okay? So here's my reasoning for this. In Federalist number 10, Madison's belief that an empowered national government would diminish the impact of factions was correct. The large republic that is the United States has been able to, or has been effectively able to overrule poor state policy making that existed because of mob mentality. Okay, so here's my rationale for this. All right, and maybe I need to put in an extra sentence about this too. But Southern states, prior to and after the Civil War, had enacted many local policies that, number one, enslaved black people, and then even afterwards prevented them from voting, segregated society, and relegated them to second class citizens. Okay? So ultimately, the national government having the ability to make nationalized policies is a good thing because it can overrule that mob mentality. All right. The national government corrected racial injustices through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, several Supreme Court decisions like Brown versus Board, and federal laws like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and executive energy such as President Eisenhower's ordering the integration of schools. All right. So what I'm saying is, hey, Federalist number 10, which I described up here, I explained up here, relates to my thesis because Madison was right. All right. An empowered national government, a government with strong national authority, can overrule mob mentality at the state level because everybody in Georgia thinks alike, or at least they think similarly than, say, somebody from Georgia versus somebody from California. All right. And the national government, having a broad amount of powers, can correct those stupid policy decisions made by states. All right. And then look, for the second, like, remember, you could use any other rationale or a piece of evidence for this. Like, once I've used Federalist number 10, I'm going to use something similar to, say, the Articles of Confederation. Okay. I would say, hey, the Articles of Confederation, yes, it was our first national document and it created a weak national government. And look how poorly that turned out. States made terrible decisions when they were left to their own. And essentially, we found out later on that America has prospered under the Constitution and this strong sense of national government. Okay, so remember, you got your thesis, and Over here, you've got your evidence about Federalist number 10, and then you've got your reasoning saying, here's why Federalist number 10 relates to my thesis, that a strong national government can effectively work against a mob mentality. All right. Then you got to get to your concession or the refutation or the rebuttal. Right. And the way this works is you admit that the other side has a point about something, and then you say why you're still on the right side or why that point is wrong. Okay. And so here's my example for this. I'd say critics of the national government's strong and broad powers might argue that the founding fathers intended for individual states to possess the authority to make their own policies and have a weak national government under the Articles of Confederation. And this is a true statement. So I could concede the point and say, look, you're right. The Articles of Confederation, all right, that was what the founders intended. But the nation suffered under that document, under that weak national government. All right, that's similar to what I was just describing, but it still works out. All right. Setbacks such as Shays' Rebellion signaled to Americans that a stronger national government was needed, and that's why we changed and adopted the Constitution. Okay, so that's my argument for why stronger national government powers are actually a good thing for policy making. Okay, let's look at example B. I'm going to walk you through example B. Okay, this thesis, stronger national government power hinders policy making because it does not effectively address the unique needs of each state or region in the nation. All right, remember, your thesis has to come down on a side and then because and then have your rationale or your reasoning, your line of reasoning, right? That I can say, hey, you know what? Having the national government with all these powers is a bad thing because every state has unique needs and a one size fits all approach is not going to work, right? So I'm going to look at my evidence, okay? Remember, I have to choose from one of those three documents for one piece of evidence, and I'm choosing Brutus number 1. I have to describe what it is or explain what it is. You have to explain each piece of evidence. So Brutus number 1 was a response to the Federalist Papers by an unknown advocate for strong state authority. He argued small republics could better address the needs and wants of their citizens since they live among them and they have a smaller territory to govern. All right? That's what Brutus number 1 is. Okay? You have to explain what it is. Now I'm going to explain or give the reasoning as to how this document, Brutus 1, connects back to my thesis. Okay? So here's my rationale. Here's example B. Every state in the Union is made up of different people who have different religions, traditions, and ways of living that are not the same as other states. Creating a one-size-fits-all policy for a diverse nation was precisely what Brutus number 1 hoped to prevent. Policy making is much easier when you have a smaller state with a population who are far more likely to agree upon ways of living than a national legislature with a wide array of beliefs and lifestyles. In my home state, coal mining is a significant resource, and we want to allow more permissive laws to extract it from the ground. Why should the national government be permitted to prevent us from doing this when the overwhelming majority of people want it? All right. So I'm giving an example that, hey, strong policy, strong government powers screw up things in policy making because here in West Virginia, for instance, we're trying to live out what Brutus number 1 said. The overwhelming majority of people want coal mining in this particular state. Right. So ultimately, we should be allowed to do that. All right. We can make policies that best suit us. All right. Now, the rebuttal for this. Okay. My concession or rebuttal would be this. Those who believe the broad powers of national governments benefit policymaking are correct when they state Madison's claim that a large republic will prevent a mob mentality and it causes bad policymaking from the states. However, bad policy decisions at the state level only affect a small number of citizens. Bad policy decisions from an overly strong national government will cause an entire nation to suffer. One of the benefits of federalism was supposed to be allowing states to be laboratories of democracy where new ideas are tried. And if those experiments fail, they don't sink the entire nation, but if they succeed, other states would be free to adopt similar laws. So I'm saying you're right. Federalist number 10 and James Madison were right. A large republic will prevent mob mentality. However, okay, there's always a however or a but. So I'm conceding that Madison was right, but I'm adding a statement to that. Here's why I'm still right on my argument. Okay, bad policy decisions, when they come at the state level, if West Virginia screws up, it only affects West Virginia. If the national government makes a bad policy, then it screws up the entire nation. All right, and so we don't want that. All right. So those are my examples of two particular arguments. Okay. Once again, what you have to do is you want to figure out what the prompt is, list all the evidence you could think of for either argument. All right. And then you're going to write a thesis where you have to come down on a side and state a line of reasoning. You've got to have the word because in there. All right. And then the line of reasoning. Then you have to explain the evidence. Just tell what it is. Like if you use Federalist number 10 as your evidence, you have to be able to explain what it is. Then you're going to have to come up with the reasoning for that. How does your evidence, how does Federalist number 10 explain your thesis? Okay? How does Brutus number 1 explain your thesis? Okay, you got to connect it back to the thesis. All right, and then finally, you have to make a concession. You have to say, hey, the other side has a point here, but here's why I still have the better argument. All right. Now, you don't have to write out this one. Obviously, there's no need for it since I just walked you through it. But if you want to try to come up with it on your own, you should do that. And we're going to get a different example later this week, maybe early next week, depending on what school looks like. But we're going to walk you through this in class too. But I wanted to get you accustomed to this now, and it's a good thing to look at for a Monday. All right. Also realize that you have a quiz online, so make sure you get that done today. Miss you guys. Hope to see you soon.